The wheel of time turns for better or worse, and it will keep on turning. As lights die and forests give way to grasslands or deserts, storms call and skies break, turn it will. The wheel of time is not hope. It is not empathy. The wheel of time simply is. But so long as it turns, people may hope, people may care. And as one empire's light fades, another empire's light grows brighter. And so, the wheel of time turns. When Phraates II died fighting the nomadic Saka on his eastern borders, the crown would pass to his uncle. His uncle Artabanus was already in his late Middle Ages upon ascension. His period on the throne from 127 to 124 or 123 would represent a period of decline for the Parthians. He would also be the last of the Parthian nobility to rule at the crossroads between Hellenistic influence and Iranian customs making a comeback. As with his predecessors, his minted coins would show him to still wear the Greek diadem, but maintain the Iranian beard. He would start his short reign fighting the very same nomadic tribes that his nephew had fought, even agreeing to pay them tribute to force a lull in the fighting. While in the east, Hyspaosines, an Iranian prince, declared an independent kingdom in a region of southern Mesopotamia. He would call his kingdom Characene. Artabanus deemed the threat from the nomadic tribes as more important, and he would continue to focus on them instead. During a particularly brutal battle against the Yuezhi, he would suffer a critical wound to his arm, which could not be treated, and he would die some short hours later. His death would mark a turning point for his son Mithridates II, would not only turn the tide back for Parthian influence, he would turn it into a superpower. However, the Parthian lands that he inherited were still in decline, and he faced the continuing onslaught of the tribes in the east, in addition to the pressures of the various Diadochi kingdoms still vying for influence in the west. The last few Parthian kings had been killed fighting the nomadic tribes, so Mithridates made a decision to start there and ensure that they pose no further threat during his reign. Hyspaosines, who had declared independence in his newly founded kingdom of Characene, did not think his kingdom would survive wars against the Parthians or the other regional powers. He therefore quickly came to terms with Mithridates. He had seized Babylon in 127, which he also turned over to Mithridates, with the understanding that the rest of the kingdom would continue under his rule and then the rule of his heirs. He also returned the wooden throne of Arsaces to Mithridates as a gift to the god Bel. Having secured this region of Mesopotamia, Mithridates turned his attention towards Elymais, which the Parthians had lost when it was seized by an Elamite king by the name of Pittit upon Artabanus' death. Mithridates had raised two large armies. He kept one in the east to keep the advance of the nomadic tribes in check, and the other he took with him to Elymais. He was able to overrun the territory and capture Susa. Pittit, though, had fled with what remaining troops he had to the far ends of his lands, with Mithridates in hot pursuit. He forced his enemy's troops yet further into a narrowing valley in the region. Unable to retreat further, Pittit and his troops hoped to have time to prepare adequately for the Parthian assault they knew would be coming. However, the Parthians were beginning to employ the tactics that would serve them so well later against what would become their main foe, the Roman Republic, from lands far beyond their western borders. The tactic to strike fast and hard with a charging archer cavalry unit and then retreat while simultaneously continuing to assault the pursuers with arrows and then repeat this in subsequent waves. The tactic could be employed during all stages of battle. Even when driven to almost defeat, this tactic could, and often did, turn the tide and deliver the Parthians victory. This battle against Pitid's troops, however, would not require multiple waves. Their first assault proved the decisive one, as it sowed chaos among the defenders, who were quickly routed, but had nowhere to retreat. There was no time even to surrender, as the Parthians had already begun to overrun them entirely. Few would survive. Mithridates would then essentially unopposed return and re-annex Elymais. Mithridates was much more than just a good military commander. He had considerable strategic insight at the level required to run an empire. Aware of the strategic position of the lands of Armenia, which lay between Asia Minor, the Caucasus, and the Iranian core homelands, he again began to use the Achaemenid title of King of Kings, and he struck coins that would now fully represent himself as a non-Hellenistic ruler. With a bit of creative historical fiction, they would begin the myth creation, linking their line with that of the Achaemenids. And in 120 BCE, Mithridates would invade Armenia, although the Armenians, under their king Artabazides, would recognize Parthian suzerainty. Mithridates accepted under the condition he would receive a hostage in return. The historical records, while not completely clear, point to the hostage as likely having been Tigranes, and he was either the king's son or his nephew. Little did Mithridates know at the time how pivotal Armenia would prove for the empire. It would transfer hands in and out of Parthian control many times during the later years of the empire. While we don't have definitive evidence, there's speculation and some coin evidence that other kingdoms in the Caucasus region, such as Iberia, would become vassal states as well. If not, it's still evident that the Parthians wielded considerable influence in the region. Documents from Babylonian archaeological sites speak of multiple raids by Arabian tribes during this period. In 119 BCE, a significantly sized group of Parthians inflicted a crushing defeat on those very tribes. After this victory, they left for Media, where they massed with the rest of the Parthians' regional troops. Mithridates next captured the Seleucid city of Dura Europus on the Euphrates. The Seleucids had been pushed to the brink by almost every political entity in the region, not to mention the recently arrived Roman Republic, and they were now but a half century or so from becoming a mere footnote in history. Next for Mithridates, a series of conflicts in the east to stem the tide of incessant nomadic incursions, but also partially out of revenge, for his ancestors had been affected by these two tribes, with two, Artabanus and Phraates, dying directly at their hands. He would start in the northern reaches adjacent to the Parthian core homelands. His army, much larger than those sent east in the past, and it would benefit from tactics Mithridates and his generals had further refined. The Tocharians would not only be defeated, but the remnants of their presence would be pushed back beyond the borders. Mithridates then turned his forces towards western Bactria, which had recently been overrun by the Scythians. They crushed all opposition, and as with the northern reaches, were successful in pushing all adversaries over what would be an expanded eastern border for the Parthians. Mithridates understood that they would require open trade access along the east in order to sustain what was now clearly becoming a Parthian empire. The Saka had been driven into Drangiana, likely by the pressure Mithridates and his forces had exacted further up north. Drangiana, which also went by the old Persian name of Zraka, meaning waterland. In roughly 120, Mithridates sent his general from the house of Surin. It would become a tradition that the head of the house of Surin would crown the Parthian king, as they had first done so in the 3rd century BCE. After successfully capturing the region, the house of Surin was given those lands as their own fiefdom. The Parthian Empire now stretched east as far as the lands of modern-day southern Afghanistan. And with the east secured, Mithridates would turn his full attention back towards the western borders. Beyond these new borders, even farther east, however, the Emperor Wu of the Han Dynasty in China had also been expanding. They, like Mithridates and the Parthians, had been dealing with nomadic tribes, and their pursuit of them had brought them close to Parthian territory. In fact, they had gone as far west for them as the Fergana homeland valley of the Parthians. A delegation would go on to meet with Parthian leadership, and this would lead to the formation of the Silk Road, a trade route that would connect east and west for almost 2,000 years. Unknown to him, a tempest, however, in the west was stirring. The Roman Republic had been expanding outside of its homeland. Initially, it was land on the Greek peninsula. Then it dealt with an age-old foe, the Carthaginians in North Africa and what is now Spain. The Roman Republic's advance would only accelerate after a series of military reforms called the Marian Reforms, which were implemented in 107. These reforms would substantially increase the catchment zone of the Republic military recruitment. Those who had formerly been excluded due to a variety of reasons, like not being Roman landowners, would now be allowed in the military. In fact, it would become one of the most viable forms of societal advancement for those born outside of wealth, connections, and privilege. The Romans would now have a professional standing army. Mithridates still held hostage the Armenian Tigranes. In 96 or 95, he released him and had him appointed as king of Armenia. In return, the Parthians were ceded territory to the west and southwest of the Caspian. Mithridates also had Tigranes marry one of his daughters to help ensure future ties between the two. That same year, Mithridates had sent Orobazus, one of his officials, an envoy to negotiate with the Romans and reach an agreement that would ensure mutual respect between the two powers. The outcome of these negotiations would be the spark for a centuries-long conflict, one that could be seen to have been initiated, if not certainly antagonized, by the Romans. Sulla, the Roman general who headed the Roman portion of the talks, gained the upper hand and made the Parthians out to be pleading, sniveling, and begging for recognition, which was not the case. Orobazus would come home empty-handed, with the Parthians appearing weak and conniving. He would be executed, but the damage done through his lack of experience in dealing with someone like Sulla, well, that had already been inflicted. On the eve of Mithridates' death, the Parthians would control almost all territory east of the Euphrates. The Parthians had culturally continued to identify less and less with the Hellenistic forms of culture and more with the Achaemenid forms. They saw themselves as heir and guardians of that heritage, and that would only continue. Zoroastrianism would also once again rise to prominence, displacing the Parthians' own deities, slowly at first, but steadily, until it would become the empire's main religion. Mithridates' own legacy would be a strong, unified Parthian empire. He would not live to see the epic battles that would be waged with the Roman Republic and then empire, or the continued dominance in the region by the Sasanians, who would replace the Parthians in a few hundred years' time. In Part 4, we will cover Mithridates' son, Gotarzes, and continue the story of the Parthian Empire. If you haven't yet, but like these types of videos, please give it a thumbs up. And if you like what you see on the channel, please consider subscribing. We'd love to have you on board. To everyone else, Patreon supporters and the like, thank you so much. And as always, cheers until the next video.